When I bought my house in Meadowbrook Estates, I thought I'd found the perfect suburban sanctuary. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained homes, and neighbors who actually waved hello. The HOA seemed reasonable enough during the walkthrough. Standard stuff about lawn maintenance, exterior paint colors, and keeping the peace. I'd dealt with homeowner associations before in my previous properties, so I figured this would be no different. Boy, was I wrong. The problem had a name, and that name was Karen Fieldstone. Karen was the HOA President, a title she wore like a crown. She was in her early 50s, with that particular haircut that had become a meme, and an expression that suggested she'd just bitten into a lemon at all times. She drove a white SUV with a custom license plate that read, HOA Queen, which should have been my first warning sign. But I'd been busy with work, traveling for consulting gigs, and honestly hadn't paid much attention to neighborhood politics. That all changed on October 1st. I'd spent the previous weekend putting up Halloween decorations. Nothing outrageous, mind you. Some tasteful orange lights along the walkway, a few pumpkins on the porch, a scarecrow in the garden, and one of those projection lights that cast ghost images on the garage door. My house looked festive and welcoming, and the neighborhood kids had already started asking if I'd be giving out full-size candy bars. Spoiler alert, I was. If you're enjoying this story of petty power and epic revenge, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe to Karen Eat World for more tales of entitled neighbors getting exactly what they deserve. Trust me, you won't want to miss where this one goes. I'd left for a 3-day business trip on October 2nd. When I returned on October 5th, my decorations were gone. Not damaged by weather, not stolen by pranksters, just gone. The lights had been carefully removed and coiled up, left in a pile on my porch. The pumpkins were missing entirely. The scarecrow had been dismantled and stuffed into a garbage bag. Even the projection light had been unplugged and placed in a box. I stood there, briefcase in hand, staring at the bare porch in confusion. Then I noticed the paper tucked under my doormat. An official HOA violation notice, printed on cream-colored cardstock with the Meadowbrook Estates logo at the top. The notice read, Dear resident, your property has been found in violation of Meadowbrook Estates Community Standards, Section 12, Subsection F, Seasonal Decorations. As per community guidelines, seasonal decorations must not promote celebrations that conflict with the religious or personal beliefs of HOA leadership. Your decorations have been removed and stored for pickup at the HOA office. Please collect them within 30 days or they will be disposed of. First warning. Karen Fieldstone, HOA President. I read it 3 times, certain I was missing something. I'd reviewed the HOA documents before closing. I'd seen the decoration guidelines. There was stuff about no inflatables over 12 feet, no decorations before the 1st of the month for any holiday, and nothing that stayed up more than 2 weeks after the holiday ended. But nothing about religious conflicts or HOA leadership's personal beliefs. I pulled out my phone and called the HOA office. Karen answered on the second ring, her voice dripping with saccharine false politeness. Hello, Meadowbrook Estates HOA, Karen Fieldstone speaking. Hi Karen, this is from 42 Sycamore Drive. I just got home and found a violation notice about my Halloween decorations. Oh yes. Her tone shifted, becoming clipped and officious. Those decorations were in clear violation of our standards. I read the notice, but I reviewed all the HOA documents before I moved in. I didn't see anything about Halloween specifically being prohibited. Well, as HOA President, I have the authority to interpret and enforce community standards as I see fit. I don't celebrate Halloween for personal and religious reasons, and I don't believe it's appropriate for our community to promote such a holiday. I blinked, processing this. So you remove my decorations because you personally don't celebrate Halloween? I removed violations of community standards. Now, if you'd like to collect your items, the office is open Tuesday and Thursday from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Karen, with all due respect, you can't just make up rules based on your personal preferences. I can, and I did. Section 3 of the HOA Charter gives the President broad discretionary powers in matters of community aesthetics and standards. If you have a problem with it, you're welcome to bring it up at the next board meeting. That's November 15th. Good day. She hung up. I stood there, looking at my phone, feeling that particular type of anger that comes from dealing with petty bureaucratic tyranny. But I'm not one to fly off the handle. I'd built my career as a consultant for Fortune 500 companies by staying calm, analyzing systems, and finding elegant solutions to complex problems. This was just another problem to solve. First, I needed information. I spent the next few hours diving deep into the Meadowbrook Estates HOA documents, bylaws, charter, and every scrap of official paperwork I could find. What I discovered was fascinating. Karen had been president for 6 years, running unopposed each election because, frankly, no one else wanted the job. The board consisted of 5 members, but the other 4 were essentially rubber stamps. They approved whatever Karen wanted because she did all the actual work. More interestingly, Section 3, which Karen had cited, did give the president discretionary authority, but only within the bounds of existing rules. It explicitly stated that new restrictions had to be voted on by the board and announced to residents 30 days before enforcement. Karen had violated her own procedures. But here's where it got really interesting. The HOA Charter also had a clause about rule changes requiring a supermajority of residents to override. And there was a provision for residents to call special meetings if they could get 20% of homeowners to sign a petition. I drafted a careful, professional email to Karen, copied to all board members whose emails I could find, laying out my position. I cited specific sections, noted the procedural violations, and requested that my violation notice be rescinded. I kept it factual, polite, and airtight. Her response came within an hour. Your complaint has been noted and denied. The violation stands. Any further decorations displayed will result in daily fines of $50 per day, per violation. KF. Game on. Over the next 2 days, I did what I do best, research and networking. I started talking to neighbors, casually at first, asking about their experiences with the HOA. What I found was a pattern. Karen had been escalating her petty tyranny for years. She'd fine people for having trash cans visible from the street for more than 4 hours on collection day. She'd forced one family to repaint their house because the shade of beige was, quote, too yellow. She'd banned birthday balloons tied to mailboxes because they were, quote, visual pollution. But the Halloween thing was new, and it was affecting multiple families. I counted at least 15 houses that had put up Halloween decorations, only to have them removed by Karen personally. She'd gone door to door, let herself onto people's property, and taken down their decorations, leaving the same violation notice for each. Several neighbors were angry but felt powerless. Karen had worn them down over the years with constant petty enforcement. But I could tell they were ready for change. They just needed someone to lead the charge. I organized a meeting at my house that Saturday. 23 neighbors showed up. We compared notes, shared our Karen horror stories, and more importantly, we strategized. I explained the charter provisions and my plan to call a special meeting to vote on explicitly allowing Halloween decorations and, more broadly, to limit the president's discretionary authority. We got the signatures we needed within a week. 37 households signed the petition, well over the 20% threshold. I submitted it formally to the HOA office, along with a proposed agenda for the special meeting. Karen had to schedule it within 30 days per the charter. Her response was to fine me $500 for, quote, creating neighborhood discord and organizing unofficial gatherings that undermine HOA authority. I didn't pay it. Instead, I consulted with my attorney Marcus Reeves, who I had worked with for years on various property deals and contract negotiations. Marcus was expensive but brilliant, and he loved nothing more than dismantling petty tyrants hiding behind bad interpretations of governing documents. "This is beautiful," Marcus said, reviewing all my documentation. "She's violated about a dozen procedural rules. She's absolutely acting outside her authority, and that fine she tried to levy is completely unenforceable. But here's what I love: if you push this, she's going to escalate. People like her always do. And when she does, we'll have her. So what do you recommend? Go to the meeting. Present your case. Be calm, be factual, and let her show everyone exactly who she is. People like Karen can't help themselves. She'll overplay her hand." The special meeting was scheduled for October 27th in the community center. I showed up 15 minutes early with printed copies of all relevant documents, a PowerPoint presentation, and notes organized in a leather portfolio. Marcus came with me, introduced simply as my advisor. 48 residents packed into the community center. The energy was electric. People were tired of Karen's reign, and this felt like the moment things might actually change. Karen sat at the front table with her board members, looking like a queen holding court. She gavelled the meeting to order with unnecessary force. "This special meeting has been called due to a petition by a resident who apparently has too much time on his hands." She said this while looking directly at me. "We'll hear his complaint, the board will consider it, and then we'll vote. I expect this won't take long." I walked to the front, connected my laptop to the projector, and began my presentation. I laid out the facts calmly. The HOA documents that allowed seasonal decorations. The lack of any provision banning Halloween specifically. The procedural violations in Karen's enforcement. The illegal fine she'd attempted to levy against me. I could see Karen's face reddening as I spoke. Her jaw clenched tighter with each point I made. When I finished, I opened the floor for discussion. 7 other residents stood up and shared their own stories of Karen's overreach. The birthday balloons. The beige paint. One man talked about being fined because his grass was 2.6 inches tall instead of the mandated 2.5 inches, a measurement Karen had apparently made personally with a ruler. Finally, Karen couldn't contain herself anymore. She stood up, slamming her hands on the table. "Enough. I am the president of this HOA. I have served this community for 6 years, and I will not be undermined by some newcomer who thinks he can just waltz in here and challenge the way things are done. Halloween is a pagan holiday that promotes devil worship and witchcraft, and I will not have it celebrated in a community that I am responsible for. If you people had any moral backbone, you'd support me instead of siding with him." The room went dead silent. Even her rubber-stamped board members looked uncomfortable. Marcus leaned over and whispered, "There it is." The vote wasn't even close. 42 residents voted to explicitly allow Halloween decorations and to significantly limit the president's discretionary authority. Only Karen and her board members voted against it, and even one board member abstained. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. On October 28th, I put my Halloween decorations back up. Not just the original ones, but I added more. More lights, more pumpkins, a fog machine, and a sound system playing spooky music. It was festive, fun, and completely within the newly clarified rules. That night, at around 2 a.m., I was woken up by a crash. I looked out my bedroom window and saw Karen in my yard, actively destroying my decorations. She was smashing pumpkins with a baseball bat, ripping lights off the walkway, and kicking over the scarecrow. I grabbed my phone and started recording. I also called 911. 911, what's your emergency? Someone is destroying property in my yard. I need police. The dispatcher sent a unit. I watched from my window as Karen continued her rampage, completely oblivious that she was being recorded and that police were 3 minutes away. The officers arrived, lights flashing. Karen froze, baseball bat in hand, surrounded by destroyed decorations. I came outside with my phone, video still rolling. "That's her," I said calmly. "That's Karen Fieldstone, the HOA President. She's been destroying my property for the last 10 minutes. I have it all on video." Karen sputtered, trying to explain that she was enforcing community standards, that I was in violation, that she had authority. The officers weren't interested. They saw destroyed property and a woman with a baseball bat. They arrested her for criminal mischief and trespassing. I pressed charges. The next morning, the story spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Karen Fieldstone, HOA President, arrested for smashing Halloween decorations. It would have been funny if it weren't so sad. But I'll admit, I felt a grim satisfaction. This was what Marcus had predicted. She'd overplayed her hand spectacularly. Karen was released on bail later that morning. By afternoon, I'd received an email from the HOA board. The other 4 members had held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Karen as president, effective immediately. She was also removed from the board entirely. I thought that was the end of it. Justice served, lesson learned, time to move on. But Karen wasn't done. Over the next 3 days, she launched a campaign of harassment that was breathtaking in its pettiness. She filed noise complaints with the city about my, quote, excessive Halloween music. She called code enforcement claiming my decorations violated city ordinances. She even contacted my employer, somehow finding out where I worked, and left messages claiming I was harassing her. None of it stuck, of course. The music was well within legal limits. The decorations complied with all city codes. And my employer knew me well enough to dismiss her ravings. But it was exhausting and invasive. Then, on November 1st, I found a letter in my mailbox. Not from the HOA, but from Karen personally. It was unhinged. Pages of rambling text about how I'd ruined her life, destroyed her reputation, and turned the neighborhood against her. She blamed me for everything: her arrest, her removal from the board, even her husband apparently being, quote, disappointed in her. The letter ended with a threat: she was going to sue me for defamation, harassment, and emotional distress. She was going to take everything I had. I called Marcus immediately. "She sent me a written threat to sue," I said. "Is this actionable?" "Oh, it's actionable all right," Marcus said, and I could hear the grin in his voice. "Forward it to me. Also, send me everything. Every email, every violation notice, the video of her destroying your property, witness statements from neighbors, all of it." "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking Karen just made the biggest mistake of her life. She thinks she can bully you with a lawsuit? Let me show you what a real lawsuit looks like." Over the next week, Marcus built a case that was a work of art. Harassment, stalking, abuse of authority, property destruction, defamation, since she told multiple people I was a troublemaker and devil worshiper, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. He documented every single interaction, every violation notice, every fine, every petty complaint. He gathered statements from 26 neighbors about Karen's pattern of harassment and abuse of power. And then he found something beautiful. Meadowbrook Estates, it turned out, had been developed by a company called Sycamore Properties back in 2005. The HOA had been established by the developer, with all the original governing documents filed as part of the property deeds. But here's the interesting part. Sycamore Properties had retained certain rights over the HOA, including the ability to dissolve it entirely if it was found to be operating outside its charter or causing harm to property values. Those rights hadn't been exercised in nearly 20 years, because Sycamore Properties had long since moved on to other projects. The company still existed, but it was now a small holding company managing legacy interests. And I happened to know the CEO. Daniel Thorne and I had worked together years ago on a resort development project in Colorado. We'd stayed in touch, the way people do in the consulting world. Holiday cards, occasional emails, that sort of thing. I hadn't realized his company was connected to Meadowbrook Estates until Marcus pulled up the property records. I called Daniel. "You're not going to believe this," I said, and explained the situation. Daniel laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from someone who appreciates a good irony. "So you bought a house in one of my old developments, and the HOA president went psycho on you about Halloween decorations?" "That's the short version, yes. And now you want to know if I can do anything about it." Marcus thinks Sycamore might have grounds to intervene, given the documentation we have of the HOA operating outside its charter. There was a pause. "Send me everything. Let me look at what rights we actually have. I'll call you back." Daniel called back 2 days later. "Okay, this is wild. We do have dissolution rights, but I haven't looked at that provision in probably 15 years. Here's what it says. If the HOA is found to be operating in a manner detrimental to property values or community welfare, Sycamore Properties can call for a vote of residents to dissolve the HOA entirely. If 2/3 vote yes, it's dissolved, and all common areas revert to individual property ownership or city control." Would you actually do that? For anyone else? Probably not. It's a headache, and there's no money in it for us. But for you? After what this Karen person put you through? Yeah, I'll do it. Consider it a favor. Plus, honestly, it'll be fun to flex some old contract muscles. Marcus, Daniel, and I spent the next 3 weeks preparing. We documented everything. We hired a property assessor who confirmed that Karen's erratic enforcement and the negative publicity from her arrest had actually hurt property values in Meadowbrook Estates. Houses were sitting on the market longer than comparable properties in nearby neighborhoods. We gathered more statements from residents, not just about Karen, but about the HOA generally. It turned out that while Karen had been the worst offender, the HOA itself had become a source of stress and expense for most residents. Annual fees had increased 30% over 6 years, mostly to fund Karen's increasingly elaborate enforcement schemes. On November 20th, Sycamore Properties sent an official notice to all Meadowbrook Estates residents. The notice explained the dissolution provision, outlined the evidence of HOA mismanagement, and called for a vote to be held on December 15th. If the vote passed, the HOA would be dissolved, all common areas would be transferred to the city or to resident ownership, and all existing HOA rules and fees would be eliminated. The neighborhood erupted. Some people loved the idea. Others were worried about losing HOA services. But the majority were intrigued by the possibility of being free from Karen's legacy and from the fees. Karen, predictably, lost her mind. She sent emails to everyone she could think of, claiming this was all my doing, which was true, that I was trying to destroy the neighborhood, which was debatable, and that dissolving the HOA would lead to chaos and plummeting property values, which was demonstrably false given that properties in the nearby non-HOA neighborhood sold for more. She even showed up at my door one evening, demanding to talk. I didn't answer. I just filmed her through the window as she rang the doorbell repeatedly and shouted about lawsuits and revenge. More evidence for Marcus's case file. The vote on December 15th was held in the same community center where we'd had the special meeting. 72 households showed up or submitted proxy votes. The threshold needed was 56 votes. The final tally was 68 in favor of dissolution, 4 against. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA was officially dead. There was cheering, actual cheering when the results were announced. People hugged each other. Someone brought champagne. It was like the neighborhood had been liberated from an occupying force. I watched Karen sitting in the back of the room, her face pale, her hands clenched in her lap. She'd gone from HOA queen to powerless resident in less than 2 months. But I wasn't done yet. Remember that lawsuit Karen threatened? She actually filed it in early December, just before the vote. It was as ridiculous as expected, full of wild claims and zero evidence. Marcus had it dismissed within 2 weeks, and the judge sanctioned Karen for filing a frivolous lawsuit, ordering her to pay my legal fees. That came to $47,000. But the real masterpiece, the thing I'm most proud of, came in January. The dissolution of the HOA meant that all common areas had to be distributed. The community center, the small park, and the walking trails that ran through the neighborhood. Most of it went to the city, as planned. But there was one parcel that was more complicated. A half-acre lot at the entrance to the neighborhood, where the old HOA office building stood. Under the original development agreement, if the HOA dissolved, that parcel reverted to Sycamore Properties to dispose of as they saw fit. Daniel called me in mid-January. So, about that entrance lot. We need to sell it. Are you interested? What would I do with an old HOA office? I don't know. But I thought I'd offer it to you first before we list it publicly. You've earned that. I thought about it for maybe 30 seconds. How much? For you? $50,000. It's worth twice that, but like I said, favor. I bought it that week. Cash offer, quick close. Then I hired an architect. The old HOA office was torn down in February. In its place, I had built something special. A community Halloween store. Year-round. Decorations, costumes, party supplies, everything Halloween, every single day of the year. I called it Spooktacular, and I made sure the sign was huge, bright orange and purple, visible from the main road. It was tasteful enough to pass city ordinances but impossible to miss. And here's the best part. The lot was at the entrance to the neighborhood, which meant Karen had to drive past it every single time she left her house or came home. That massive, cheerful, aggressively Halloween sign would be the first and last thing she saw every day. I didn't run the store myself, obviously. I hired a management company that specialized in niche retail. But I made sure to be there on opening day in late March, handing out free samples and coupons to anyone who stopped by. The store was a hit. People loved it. Kids begged their parents to stop in. It became a destination, drawing customers from all over the region. And Karen? I spotted her driving past that first week. I was outside, helping to arrange a display of life-size skeleton decorations. She slowed down as she approached, and I saw her face through her windshield. The moment of recognition, the dawning horror, the realization of what I'd done. She tried to ban Halloween from her neighborhood out of petty personal preference. And now, instead of an HOA she controlled, instead of a neighborhood under her thumb, she lived at the entrance to Halloween Central. 365 days a year, she would be reminded of her downfall. Every single day, she would drive past a monument to the holiday she despised, built on the very spot where she'd once wielded her petty power. Karen pulled over across the street, staring at the store, at the sign, at me standing there in an orange Spooktacular t-shirt, waving cheerfully at customers. I saw her hands grip the steering wheel, her knuckles white. Her mouth moved like she was screaming, but I couldn't hear it through the closed windows of her SUV. For one perfect moment, I watched as the full scope of it hit her. The HOA dissolved. The lawsuit dismissed with sanctions. The legal fees she now owed me. And now this permanent, cheerful, completely legal reminder that she'd lost. Not just lost the battle, but lost so completely that her enemy had literally bought the ground she used to stand on and turned it into a shrine to the thing she hated most. I gave her a friendly wave. She stared at me, her expression a mixture of rage, disbelief, and something that might have been the first hint of understanding that she'd been absolutely, thoroughly, permanently outmaneuvered. And if you enjoyed watching Karen's petty tyranny transformed into her own personal Halloween nightmare, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Karen Eat World. Because trust me, we've got plenty more stories of entitled people getting the poetic justice they deserve. Until next time, remember, sometimes the best revenge is turning someone's biggest complaint into their permanent view.